Hey, I'm Winston Hodges, a stand up comedian based on the East Coast, and I am here today with climate change scientist and associate professor at Oregon State University, Dominique Bachelet, and she is going to educate me a little bit on climate change. So, how are you doing, Dominique?
I'm doing fine.
I'm very excited for you to teach me a little bit because I took the two quizzes that you sent me to take. Um, and I found out that I only got one question right on the first quiz, and it is because I accidentally put the wrong answer in. So I was, yeah, and I won't lie, you sent that one that was like you put in the food and it tells you like what your and I did beef was the only one that I did, and that how often I had beef, and it made me feel like I was the worst person who's ever lived.
Yeah, and you have to be careful. These quizzes, assume that your beef comes from a big industrial compound that pollutes the air, pollutes the water.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you could have a farmer that lives 2 miles from your house and has a couple of cows, and once in a while, you get a steak from them. That's going to be a very different carbon footprint. So just be
Yeah.
aware, everything has to be question everything you do in terms of quizzes, where it comes from and who's doing it. And a
Yeah.
lot of the quizzes I've given to my students come actually from England, and so the distance between the farm and the town is also different from in the US. So
That's
always a
fair.
grain of salt when you get data.
Yeah, I know. I just saw it and was just like, man, it made me feel like a little helpless. Like I felt like I was like, oh man, I don't really know what I can do outside of completely change my diet.
Yeah, and a lot of people say that. I have a lot of my students say, okay, well then I can't eat meat anymore because we know that there's methane coming out of the cattle, they pollute the water and all that. But in fact, if you only reduced your consumption of meat, like if you ate meat twice a week instead of 4 times a week, that would be a significant change that would be really worthwhile. So it doesn't mean that you have to absolutely abolish every operation that has cows or
Okay.
cattle. And so it's just like everything in moderation. We can't change the economy instantly.
Okay. So basically like for me it would be like instead of going for fast food 3 times a day, I can cut it
Yes,
back to twice a day and probably
make that
do
once for your
yeah.
health. Make that once.
And I yeah, if I could do one. I so like another thing is like I because we're just trying to figure out who might be actively listening. I only know this term because of the quiz. Can you just kind of explain for dummies like what carbon footprint actually means?
So a carbon footprint actually sums up all the expenditure in carbon units instead of dollars, um, that something happens. So for example, in the agricultural sector, it includes, for example, if you go in Brazil, when you're talking about cattle, there's deforestation associated with it. So it's the people who travel there, the equipment, so the gasoline that's used for the equipment that cuts
Oh
the
wow.
trees before the field is actually plowed. So it's the machinery that does that. And then you have all the agricultural management things like the fertilizer, the nitrate. How is that built? Yeah, how is that created? So you go into the industry and you see how much they pollute, how much gasoline they use or how much gas they use. And then you go into transportation. Once you produce something, then you take a truck and you pull it to a train station or to an airport. And then these particular transport forms use a particular form of carbon, which is either fossil fuel or something else, but rarely something else. And then there's the packaging. Do you wrap it in plastic? Plastic is a petroleum
Oh
product.
my
And
god.
so that increase your carbon footprint. And then there's waste. And waste is also part of the carbon footprint. And we know that there's plenty of waste, especially in the US, in terms of all the food that we eat. And so you calculate how much is in the waste and how much just goes up in the air as an emission, a carbon emission.
Oh my, and that's like so it's not just like the one fat like it's when I'm eating the steak, it's not just oh these are the cows. It's so many other factors that make it such a bad decision to eat beef 3 times a day.
Well, yeah, and that's the problem. It's like I did my PhD in Colorado, and Greeley is next door, and you have these mega areas that are full of cows, and so the smell from Greeley coming to Fort Collins is absolutely awful. You know that they're emitting. I mean, even if you don't believe in anything related to climate change, is like that
Yeah,
air is
it's
not good
literal.
to breathe.
It's literal gas. Like it's like it's literal methane gas
Yeah,
that the
well,
entire
sulfur.
area can smell. Like you can
Yeah,
smell the
yeah.
change in the
And then the
atmosphere.
plains are flat, but now, however, all these chemicals that are in the cows just percolate into the groundwater, and that's the water that is treated and we eat. But how much of the treatment takes out all the chemicals that are actually pumped into the cows? Because the denser the places where the cows are raised, the more they need antibiotics because they could get sick, and then they are fed all sorts of stuff that's not grass from a field, and they're usually corn or some silage of some type. And so it's just like, yeah, versus my uncle's farm that had a few
Yeah.
4 cows, and that were in the pasture every day. It's very, very different. So
Yeah, that's like why, and that just shows how like little I used to know. Is because like I feel like if you had told me this just before I took those quizzes, and you'd have been like, "Yeah, we've got one of the big problems is all the cows," and I'm just like, "All right, so we should just kill all the cows." Like if we kill all the cows and we just switch to chicken, we'll be we'll be fine. They're burping and farting, and it's like just I'm assuming it's both ends is what's caused. It's not just coming out of the
yeah, and belching is a big one. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
so like when is what is I guess the first step I guess we can do with all right, so for the agriculture sector, there's all these different types of emissions. Like is there one more than the other we should try to focus on first, or is it like are they all equal problem? Like what's a good first step for I guess people like me who like now know I want to do something to help, but it's such an overwhelming thought I don't really know how to help.
So we are US citizens, so one of the first thing we have to think about is overconsumption. I think if we consumed what we needed to eat to survive, that would be a good first. There's a lot of food that is bought and contributes to obesity and diabetes. It's like we don't need to
Yeah.
eat as much as we eat, and especially processed food. I mean, like you said, a lot of people are going to those fast food and buying a hamburger. It's like, do we really need to eat a hamburger every day? I don't
Probably
think so.
probably not. I definitely don't need to do it every day, but I do it quite
Yeah.
often.
So overconsumption would be the first thing to think about. We don't
Okay.
need to eat that much. Don't go to a store and be, totally, taken by all the colors and glitz and coupons that they'll give you to buy all the processed food. The second thing is waste. It's like whatever you have in your fridge, do your math every week. How much is it still edible versus how much do you throw away? And in the US, it's like a lot of it is being wasted, and the percentages are really awful. It's like they said that between 20 and 30% of global cropland is food that is wasted, and that's
Really?
also 12 to 15% of the water that's consumed globally. So it's a huge, huge number. Even without changing anything else, if we change those two things, overconsumption and waste, we would already be one giant step forward. So
20% of that is insane. Because I
it
like I
is.
don't know. I just had no clue. I guess in my mind, I'm always like, it's hard to imagine. So we do grow enough food and stuff for
We
us.
do.
Like we're not okay.
And that's something you will read. You always read, well, there's an increase in population and we need to produce more. We do not need, one of the big problem in the world is not production, it's distribution. And being able to distribute food that is still, edible, that has not been, mildewed in the way or things like that. But we are in the US, we're producing way too much. It's insane at the production levels. We don't need that much.
Oh my gosh. All right. So the first step, the good first step is like limit our waste and limit. And I guess those kind of go hand in hand because if you're not buying as much like crap, you're not going to be
Yeah.
like having a bunch to throw away.
In the supermarket, they throw away things that are past the date limit, and that's another thing. The industry has to stamp the food to say that's best buy. That doesn't mean the food goes bad.
Yeah.
And so there's now
Really?
stores, yeah. So there's now stores that pick up that food and sell it, saying it's still good and it shouldn't be thrown away. And so, I mean, there are certain things that go bad. Obviously, if you have a
Yeah.
fish, you don't wait 8 days to
Well, yeah. Well, that one I could feel like you could tell by smell.
you could. Although, if you talk about cheese, the more it smells, the better. So it
Yeah, the
depends.
better it is. You leave that outside
Yeah,
for a while. I
yeah,
just I,
it's amazing.
so the best buy sticker doesn't mean that I that's crazy to me because there's definitely been times where I have thrown things in the freezer like the day it says Best Buy because I'm just like when I defrost it, I've got one day to eat it.
Yeah, and there are lots of people who are working on changing legislation so that it's like, okay, it's Best Buy doesn't mean after that date it goes bad instantly. That's
Wow.
not true. And
I,
so no,
I did not
especially if
didn't
it's
know
been
that.
canned properly, if it's packaged dry goods, it's like there's no reason to throw that away. But even bananas, so it's like if you don't like a ripe banana, of course, once they're not green anymore, there are people who throw away the bananas, which is actually a crime. A ripe banana can be used for banana muffins or
Yeah,
banana
banana
bread.
bread. Yep,
Yeah,
I did know that one. That's
yeah.
like the
A lot of
word.
people don't cook. It's like when I grew up in the 50s, it was like, the American kitchen was the best kitchen in the world. You'd have all these produce and stuff. And now it's the opposite. It's like you go shop for a house and the kitchens are tiny because nobody cooks anymore. So I'm hoping with the pandemic, things have changed and people have gone back to
Oh,
their kitchen and cooked.
that's fair. A lot of people stuck in their house making bread during the pandemic. Hopefully, it's awakened a little bit of like, hey, maybe we shouldn't be getting so much processed food, and maybe we can make a little bit and, buy exactly what we need as opposed to like hoarding processed foods
Yeah.
in our
Yeah.
pantries.
Problem is, the big ag industries are super subsidized by the government. And
Yeah,
so all the organic produce are so expensive that your average person cannot afford it. And so automatically you go to the
yeah,
industrially produced.
that
And
is a
it's really a
complaint.
bad tendency. And we're hoping that's going to change. Again, the pandemic may have changed a few things
Yeah,
because there's been a lot more contact with local farmers. And so
yeah.
that's
Yeah,
one of
because
the good
that's the
things.
I mean that's what I've like that's a complaint I've always heard, and it's like just people complaining about like, oh, when you go to like so and so or like Whole Foods or something, it's like it's just so expensive, and it's like
It is.
it's like prohibitively expensive to where it's just like, oh, so for the price of like one of these organic bananas, I can get and then like seven other banana. You know what I mean? It's just like
Yeah,
I could totally see where like the average person, myself included, would look at that and be like, why would I not get the best deal? Like why would
right.
I why would I
Yeah.
not get more food?
Economically, it makes perfect sense to go for the cheapest stuff. Yeah.
So we've got I think the main takeaway that I'm getting that I'm gonna like try to apply to my life is to not consume so much of the stuff that I'm not supposed to.
That's right.
Let if I am consuming stuff to like only get enough that I definitely need. For people that are already doing that, because I know that there are people out there that are like, you know what, I am either vegetarian or like I have a primarily vegetable based diet, or they have the type of disposable income to where to them
Mhm.
they're like, yeah, I'll go buy organic every time. What would
Yeah.
the next step be for people that are already at a place where they can handle that? What is the next before we get out of here? What is the next step, I think, for people after that?
And support local farmers. It's like, if you happen to live in an area that has farms that actually raise animals, support them. I mean, that's
Yeah.
and you could also look for sustainable instead of eating cattle or whatever. A beef steak. Look, there are people who are selling beef tongue. I mean, all the parts. It's like a
Yeah.
lot of those things when you grow cattle and you sell the meat. There's all the offals and stuff like that are not used, that are thrown away or used for feed.
So
And
yeah,
so
if
it's
I
like, no, it's like those things are edible. And,
yeah.
it's like you can use, I mean, in South America, in Ecuador, they eat guinea pigs. So it's like, stop being, kind of
I don't
freaky
want to
about
do
this.
that though.
And there's students at OSU who actually use, crickets. And insects is really the future because insects are unlimited. And so they have created cricket crackers called crickets, ITZ, crickets.
Yeah, with that,
And
yeah,
they're
they got to
really
do
good.
the fancy Z for marketing.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and it's like, I don't understand why people are so So it's like they eat a piece of a cow that obviously has been killed, or or a lamb chop from a little lamb that has been killed, but they won't eat a cricket cracker. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Man, I think it's just all the extra legs.
Gives
Like
you the
have-
crunchiness.
yeah,
Gives
yeah,
you
it's
the
just
crunchiness.
all the extra legs, and it just makes me think. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's probably. I think maybe if I lived like on a farm or was around like the animals that I typically eat, I would probably be like, I'm probably not gonna eat these as much. But I just see insects every day, and I'm just like, oh my, at least I don't have to eat that. And now you're coming on here telling me they're the future.
Yeah.
Oh
Do
my
you eat shrimp?
God.
Do you eat
Yeah,
shrimp?
no, don't make me think about shrimp being in. Don't do that to
How many
me,
legs? How
Dominique.
many
Don't
legs on the
don't
shrimp?
do that to me.
How about, do you eat crab?
Yeah,
Any of the,
I had crab last
well,
night.
well,
Oh man. Well, you're I mean, you're not wrong. I mean, you're definitely right. It just I was just enjoying being ignorant and not having to think about it. Well, before we get out of here, there's so much more we could talk about. Is there like any other thing we didn't cover that you think would be incredibly important for people listening to know? Or did we hit all the points we needed to hit? But I'll let you close us out
okay.
with your
How about
words of
packaging?
wisdom.
How about packaging?
Okay, let's do packaging.
Yeah, because it's like, you go to the store and children in big cities don't think about a chicken, but a piece of meat inside a plastic package.
Yeah.
It's like, can we reduce this? Can we just buy full chicken? If you want to use plastic, use a full chicken and then use the
Okay.
entire chicken. But don't start buying a bunch of things that are wrapped up in plastic. We need to get rid of the plastic. We know that it's just a total disaster around the world. So
Yeah.
let's look at the packaging and write to the companies that package stuff that you think is totally outrageous. And the more people complain about that, the more the companies will change their ways. And
Okay.
so let's reduce packaging. Let's choose with our credit cards the right produce to limit
Okay.
the.
So buy a whole chicken if you're going to get something in plastic. Are there like options of ways to get it without the plastic right now? Or are we at the point where it's like we just kind of have to start being like, hey, I want this without plastic?
So, I grew up in France, and when I go home, I go to the farmer's market and the chicken are there. And they're actually live chicken that you can have, that you can pick, and they kill them there.
Oh my
And
God.
so, but you go to the market and they're lined up on the stall. This is my hometown in the background. And, it's that stalls and people sell their produce, and they sell chicken as anything else, and butter. And so we can get chicken without plastic around it. They would be heaven, but I know that in the middle of New York City or Los Angeles, you're not going to get a fresh chicken. It would be
Okay.
best, but unlikely.
Well, I feel like that's a pretty good place to stop. We hit a bunch of really important things. I've learned a lot, and I'm going to do my best to look at crickets like they're shrimp, and I'm going to try to like get whole chickens instead of getting chicken breasts that are wrapped up in plastic.
There you
And I'll
go.
make sure that when I go to the grocery store next time I'm looking at the chicken breast, I don't go, oh, I'll buy the one that's 14 pounds because it's $1.50 a pound, as opposed to getting exactly what I need. But thanks for talking with me today, Dominique. It was good to see you.
Likewise. Thank you.